Adrian to right, base hit. Here comes the winning run. The Padres score 2 in the bottom of the ninth, come back and beat the Orioles 3-2.
Between 2006 and 2010, first baseman Adrian Gonzalez was the face of the Padres and one of the league's best hitters despite his home stadium being a pitcher-friendly environment. So when he was traded to the Red Sox ahead of the 2011 season, Gonzalez became an AL MVP favorite. He ended up having arguably the best season of his career, becoming just the 8th first baseman ever with at least 200 hits, 45 doubles, and 25 home runs in a season. But not only did Gonzalez finish 7th in MVP voting, he didn't receive a single first place vote. While you don't typically expect someone in 7th place to receive a first place vote, the 2011 AL MVP race is one of only 3 races since 2000 where at least 6 players received a first place vote. In fact, one of these players was Rangers infielder Michael Young, the joint leader in hits along with Gonzalez, but that's where their similarities end. So, removing Young from the discussion, that leaves the top 5 players on this ballot. Today, we're going to examine this contentious MVP race in depth, but we won't just be reviewing the AL MVP race.
And a high fly ball into deep left center. Back goes McLeod, at the wall, gone!
At the end of April, 3 of the top 4 F4 batting leaders were in the National League: Joey Votto, the reigning MVP, Ryan Braun, an MVP favorite, and Matt Kemp, a 26-year-old center fielder with intriguing potential. As for the league leader in F4, that was Blue Jays outfielder Jose Bautista. Considering he hit 54 home runs in his incredible 2010 breakout season, Bautista winning an MVP would make for one of the most remarkable stories in baseball history. Well, at the end of May, Bautista seemed destined for a historic MVP campaign. Through the first 47 games of any season since 1901, Bautista's OPS was the 10th highest ever. There were plenty of great American League hitters, but no one was anywhere close to this sort of production. As for the National League, the race was wide open. 2 Cardinals teammates, Lance Berkman and Matt Holliday, were the NL's 2 best hitters, but right behind them were the 3 guys we talked about earlier: Votto, Braun, and Kemp. And that's not even including other notable guys like Prince Fielder, Jose Reyes, and the National League F4 leader, Brian McCann. Well, the leader among batters. The real National League F4 leader was Roy Halladay. Even though a starting pitcher hadn't won an MVP since Roger Clemens in 1986, if anyone could do it, it was the reigning NL Cy Young. One way to gauge how fans are feeling about certain players is by looking at the All-Star voting results. Well, if there was any player the fans wanted to see, it was Jose Bautista. With nearly 7.5 million votes, this total surpassed the record of just over 6 million votes set by Ken Griffey Jr. in 1994. To be fair, Bautista had the advantage of internet voting, but even with this in mind, his popularity had surged to superstar status. However, there was reason to think that Bautista wasn't going to win the MVP. Out of the 22 MVP winners between 2000 and 2010, only 5 of them were on teams that didn't make the playoffs, and only 1 of them was on a sub-500 team. Given the Blue Jays were 2 games under 500, this trend was a noteworthy concern. So perhaps someone like Curtis Granderson, the 2nd highest All-Star vote getter, had a better chance of winning the award given the Yankees record. Although, that's not to say he wasn't a worthy candidate. Through 2011, only 2 other center fielders had ever ended the first half of a season with at least 25 home runs and 15 stolen bases: Ken Griffey Jr. and Eric Davis. Although, if we adjust the home run total to 22, we get a couple more names: 2008 Grady Sizemore and Matt Kemp, who was voted to be one of the starting outfielders in the National League. However, like Bautista, Kemp was on a sub-500 Dodgers team. Another factor to consider. As the season went on, the American League race only became more crowded. Bautista hit a mini slump at the end of July, while guys like Jacoby Ellsbury, Dustin Pedroia, Curtis Granderson, Adrian Gonzalez, and Miguel Cabrera were gaining traction. However, entering September, there was a noticeable shift in the MVP debate.
Here's the 2-2 pitch on the way. Swing and a miss. He struck him out. Verlander has done it again. A second no-hitter in his young career.
On May 7th, Tigers starter Justin Verlander threw his second career no-hitter. Between this performance and the beginning of September, Verlander turned into an absolute monster. What was notably impressive during this stretch was how many innings he pitched, 175 in 23 starts. Verlander's consistent dominance was why he turned into an MVP favorite. Again, something that hadn't been done by a starter since 1986. Ultimately, like many MVP races, this was going to come down to how voters define most valuable player. According to the Baseball Writers Association of America, there isn't a clear-cut definition, but there are some things to keep in mind. The value of a player to his team in terms of offense and defense, the number of games played, the player's character, and most notably to our story, playoff status shouldn't be part of the equation. Although voters have their own interpretations of these rules. Nonetheless, the stage was set for a chaotic final month of baseball, but no one could have predicted how this all ended. At the end of the season, there were 5 serious candidates for the AL MVP: Verlander, Bautista, Ellsbury, Granderson, and Cabrera. Between the center fielders Ellsbury and Granderson, Ellsbury was the better defender, a significant factor considering their offensive similarities. Also, Ellsbury's comeback story after missing nearly all of the 2010 season was a great storyline for voters to get behind. However, with the Red Sox's September collapse, the lack of playoffs was a problem for some voters, despite Ellsbury's incredible September stats. So perhaps Miguel Cabrera or Jose Bautista could win the award. Just 2 years prior, Bautista was a league average hitter, and now he was producing stats near identical to Jeff Bagwell in 1999, who placed second in his MVP race. Like Ellsbury, Bautista had a storybook narrative on his side. But again, he was on a non-playoff team. So how about Cabrera? He's on a playoff team and is a top 3 hitter. Well, he wasn't the home run hitter he was in 2010, and he was the worst defender out of the 4 candidates. Under the circumstances of knowing how the voters think, there wasn't really a definitive winner among these 4 players. This is where Justin Verlander comes in, the best player in the American League according to B-War. Not only did he become just the 5th American League pitcher to win the pitching Triple Crown since Hal Newhouser in 1945, he accomplished what I'm calling the 250 trio. 250 innings pitched, 250 strikeouts, and an ERA less than 2.5. Something that hadn't been done since Randy Johnson in 2002. Ultimately, the historic nature of Verlander's season, coupled with a crowded pool of batting candidates, is what led to his MVP win. As expected, there were plenty of reactions, ranging from celebration to criticism. One criticism was how there were plenty of pitchers who had won the pitching Triple Crown and made the playoffs, yet they weren't MVPs. So why did Verlander win? While there's a range of reasons as to why the other guys didn't win, Verlander's case was different for 2 main reasons. The batting candidates each had one critical flaw that voters saw as detrimental, and Verlander was the unanimous AL Cy Young winner, so there was no other pitcher on the same level as him. Interestingly, 3 voters who listed Verlander as first and Ellsbury as second had differing reasons as to why. John Morosi simply thought Verlander had the better season. Peter Abraham, who had never voted a pitcher above 6th place, didn't feel strongly about any of the other choices. Finally, Joe Christensen suggested that if the Red Sox didn't miss the playoffs, Ellsbury would have had his first place vote. Even if you don't think Verlander was the deserving winner, he was certainly a deserving candidate, and today it's one of the many accolades he possesses in his Hall of Fame career. However, we're not done. We still got one more MVP race to decide. The National League MVP race wasn't nearly as crowded as the American League. It was all down to Ryan Braun and Matt Kemp. Offensively, they were very similar players, but Kemp outperformed Braun. Also, these guys were both outfielders, with Kemp playing the more valuable position in center field. However, Braun's defense in left field outperformed Kemp's in center. So, as expected, a deciding factor some voters used was playoff status. Through this lens, Braun was the best player on a 96-win Brewers team, while Kemp was the best player on an 82-win Dodgers team. Ultimately, this led to Braun winning the MVP. It's one of those outcomes where it's impossible to please everyone, but that's what happens in a race this tightly contested. Besides, after a few days, it becomes old news anyways, so barring any sort of controversy, this just becomes another debate topic for years down the line. Well, on December 10th, 2011, it was found that Braun had tested positive for an elevated level of testosterone in a urine sample caused by a PED, resulting in a 50-game suspension. However, Braun appealed this decision, and a couple months later, the suspension was overturned, becoming the first player ever to successfully appeal a PED suspension. How did this happen? Under MLB's protocol, samples were taken to a FedEx drop-off center on the same day the samples were collected. However, this test occurred on a Saturday, and according to the test collector, Dino Lorenzi Jr., no FedEx office located within 50 miles of Miller Park would ship packages on that weekend. So, staying in accordance with protocol, he stored it in his home and sent it on Monday, something he had done before as its standard procedure. Chief Executive of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, Travis T. Tygart, said you're not going to grow synthetic testosterone because it sat in a refrigerator over the weekend. However, Braun denied ever using PEDs and believed he was a victim of a flawed system, resulting in the appeal and the overturning of his suspension after a vote by a 3-person panel. 1 year later, Braun was one of the many MLB players to be named in records from Biogenesis of America, a clinic that was under investigation for distributing PEDs. Unlike some of the other players that were implicated, Braun's name wasn't listed next to any specific PEDs. However, as the investigation went on, and with the mounting evidence against him, as well as a 100-game suspension if found guilty, Braun struck a deal to limit his suspension to 65 games, 50 games as a first-time offender, and an additional 15 games for detrimental conduct stemming from his actions following the original 2012 suspension. Although, this wasn't the end of it. In the days ahead of his appeal back in February 2012, Braun called veteran players around baseball to lobby for their support. He claimed he had personal information about the collector, Dino Lorenzi Jr. Braun, who is Jewish, claimed he had been told the collector was an anti-Semite, and he also implied that because the collector was a Cubs fan, that was further reason to tamper with the sample. With this report coming to light, everyone in the baseball world was furious at Braun. Eventually, he admitted to taking PEDs during his 2011 MVP season and apologized, saying he was in denial and convinced himself he had done nothing wrong. A few months later, Braun and his wife were invited by Lorenzi and his family to dinner, and they had made amends. Still, the damage had been done. In the eyes of many, what Braun did was irredeemable. It makes you wonder what would have happened if Kemp just hit one more home run for the illustrious 40-40 season. The 2011 MLB season was one of the most memorable seasons in recent memory for a multitude of reasons, including the MVP races. However, these two races are remembered for vastly different reasons. One of these races resulted in a historic accolade that now features in a Hall of Fame resume, while the other race resulted in an accolade that's forever stained. Overall, as time passes, it's up to the fans and the rest of the baseball world on how they wish to view these players and their achievements, so let me know in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks for watching.